hear they need a new lieutenant. Want the job?
I'll take it. Till I get killed or you find someone better.
Hi everybody, Army P here for eXplorminate.net, and welcome to our Stellaris Patch 1.3 recap. We're going to be digging into all of the dev diaries that have preceded to this point, and we're going to show you guys all of the information that is going to be coming out in the new Stellaris patch, nicknamed Heinlein, which is, of course, a throwback to that soundbite that you heard at the beginning of the video from Starship Troopers. He was the author of the original poli-sci book, and which of course morphed into an action-filled movie in the late 90s. Now that being said, there's a ton of content here, so much content in fact that 1.3 makes the previous two patches that Stellaris have previously had seem insignificant in direct comparison. Now this is going to be a video completely focusing on 100% of the free content that you're going to be getting in 1.3. We're not going to be including or talking about anything when it comes to the downloadable content that's going to accompany 1.3. I'm going to make that in a separate video just to make things very clear and very concise. So this is your one-stop shop for all of the recaps that you're going to need to know going into Stellaris 1.3, and we're going to kick it off. First thing we're going to talk about is the auto explore feature that they're adding to science vessels. Now at first I wasn't too sure if I liked the idea of an auto searching feature for our science vessels, because the strong point in Stellaris is definitely its exploration phase, which of course science vessels are imperative and they're part of that mechanic. So it turns out that, and I'll agree to this, mid-game does suffer from not knowing what exactly you're going to be doing with your science vessels, or it becomes a bit of a struggle to try to find planets or systems that you haven't surveyed. It becomes a bit of a chore. So to counteract this, what they're going to be doing is adding a mid-game tech. Now that tech, once researched, will provide you and the science vessels the ability to auto-explore. So it kind of takes away some of the mid-game micromanagement that sometimes we get with science vessels, but still lets us have direct control over the science vessels in the mid-game, or correction, the early game, which I think is just great. The next point we're going to talk about is rally points. Now this is a feature that was asked for very early in Stellaris' development, and I do believe that several excellent mods came out within days of the initial launch providing rally points. It becomes a huge challenge later in the game to be able to coordinate all of your different fleets into different areas when you've got maybe 5, 10, 15, even 20 or 30 different shipyards all building ships at the same time. What's great about the new feature from that is being added in 1.3 is that you can make a rally point any planet, any star, or any fleet. That meaning that if you have a fleet that took considerable damage in a conflict, you can put a rally point onto that fleet, and that fleet will be compensated by that shipyard. So you could literally say, I want you to build 5 corvettes, and I want them on the first strike fleet on this, on my first strike fleet, and it will be able to instantly go to that fleet and merge instantly. It's a great feature, saves a lot of micromanagement, and it's sorely needed. The next feature has also been asked for a very long time, and that's an expansion planner. Now, an expansion planner will be a new interface tab on your Empire screen. Once you click it and it pulls down, you'll be able to quickly check all the different types of planets available for you to colonize, and also all the different planets that you weren't going to be able to colonize at this point. It'll be able to reference quickly the type of planet, the size of the planet, and if it's in your space and if it's not. It'll be making mid-game expansion so much easier, because as everybody knows who's played this game just a few times, is that the mad rush of expanding initially is quite exciting, but once your empire reaches a certain size and you've got a certain amount of sectors all going at once, it's easy to lose track of those gem planets that you had an idea of what you were going to do with, but then kind of gets lost in the shuffle. So it's a feature that's going to be much appreciated, and I can't see how the kind of the demonstration of how it actually comes to be and how it plays out. Strategic resource rework. Now that's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? Okay, so apparently the devs were not happy the way that strategy and the strategic resources worked in the game. Either they said on the dev diary that often there were ones that were too plentiful and they weren't worth the extra effort of actually doing anything with them, or they were so rare that this became a point. It became too futile to try to attempt to grab these strategic resources because the payoff wasn't there. So they decided to completely rework it. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into this, but it's just some bullet points to be noteworthy. What they're going to do is split it into strategic and local. So that meaning that there is a strategic will be something that is empire-wide, and then local will be something contained to the planet. Now, local can be found on a colonizable planet, and you have to be able to build a specific building to harvest it. So the Berethian stone will be on a specific planet. Once you click on that, and then you build an energy plant on there, you'll be able to get that bonus, but the bonus will only apply to the planet that it's on. But they're also going to be adding more different types of these local resources. So it'll be something that you'll have to take into consideration when you're starting to colonize. Do you want a huge geoplanet that's got a 20 size, or do you want something a little bit smaller with a few local resources on it? It makes the choices much more interesting. Now, strategic resources have been split into military or civilian use, and they will either have a global or empire passive bonus. So they become far more valuable due to the fact that they're going to be split between military and civilian. That being said, you can have something like a military type strategic resource if you're playing a collective type empire deity that wants to wipe the entire universe of all living creatures that aren't your own race. A single unit for strategic resources will be required for whatever you're going to be using it for, but ones that are additional to that, let's say that you have 2 or 3 of a specific type of strategic resource, it can now be traded, which is very interesting because a lot of times you got onto your strategic resources and you muckled onto them and you never traded them because you never knew when you were going to need them in the future. Now they've kind of done it in a way that once you have one of that specific resource, it'll be easier for you to trade because you only need one to blanket your entire empire with whatever that bonus tends to give out. It will make trading with the AI much more interesting if you're able to put down a strategic resource on the table, especially if it's very rare and valuable. Ship combat roles. Now, ship combat is something that needed to be reworked because of different exploits that player bases quickly found out, including building a massive fleet of very maneuverable corvettes, or in one patch 1.2, they found that just building a giant fleet of battleships with long-range attacks from the tachyon pulses or tachyon lances basically owned the entire system. So there was no need to diversify your fleets. Now, there was a lot of information on ship combat rules. I'm not going to go through every point because it could easily take up a 30-minute video of me just talking about each one of them. But what I will do is I'm just going to talk about how they are attempting to make each one of the ship types unique enough that you have to encompass your entire fleet with a variation of a lot of different ships. Now, we're going to go through very quickly on some of the major changes, okay? Now, corvettes, just like in the game right now, are very fast, agile, and meant for taking out capital ships at close range. So what they've done is they've made the corvette a type of ship that deals, once it gets very close to a capital ship, can give out tremendous amount of damage. And what they've done to counteract evasion is they've got a new system called tracking. Now, the tracking counters evasion. So the corvettes will have a high amount of evasion. Now, moving on, in the new ship roles, we'll have destroyers. Now, destroyers are anti-corvette ships, but they're also more of a utility to protect larger ships from point defense. They've kind of got a dual purpose. The way that they are anti-corvette is they have excellent tracking, so they can track the smaller ships and counter their evasion. At the same time, they are also going to have a lot of point defense, which means that they will keep a large amount of missiles or torpedoes away from your capital ships. Cruisers are now going to be close-range capital ship brawlers with heavy armor or shields meant to engage destroyers, and they will have small strike craft, and strike craft will be able to launch much like a carrier out into space and try to take out the destroyers. And the reason you want your destroyers destroyed is so that all your corvettes will have free range to get after the battleships. And the battleships are long-range killers or carriers that are protected. They have very little protection when it comes to close range, but they deal massive amount of long-range damage. So the way that they've kind of gone about this was the high evasion, like I said earlier, will be countered with the tracking. Now the corvettes have high evasion and decent tracking. The destroyers, who are now are going to be the counter to the corvettes, have excellent tracking. Now the cruisers and the battleships have lower amount of tracking. So the whole idea is that the larger weapon systems won't be able to hit the smaller ships that have high evasion, but they will have the ability to hit larger stationary stations or other battleships quite easily. Way that they've kind of done that, I think, is a good mix of wanting to make a decent fleet versus just looking at something, building a certain design, and then blobbing it up and seeing if your blob beats the AI's blob, or if you're playing multiplayer, someone else's. They did say that it takes away a little bit from the ability to customize every ship, because now ships are going to have specific slots. Like I said earlier, the corvettes, because they're going to be meant for taking down battleships, are going to have a torpedo slot. But the torpedoes are very high damage, but they're low range. So they're going to have to get in through the destroyer's protection shield to be able to launch those. Additionally, they're going to have a point defense is going to be a specific slot that's only going to be able to be given to destroyers, and that is specifically for keeping torpedoes and keeping smaller strike craft away from their capital ships. Now, how all of this is all going to come together and play and be balanced has yet to be seen. But I'm encouraged that at least the developers are trying to do something with combat ship roles. And it'll be even more interesting to see how the community either embraces it or absolutely hates it. Now, I saved the best for last as far as I'm concerned when it comes to patch 1.3, and that is the changes to the Fallen Empire. Now, the Fallen Empires, when they first were announced before Stellaris was released, I thought it was such an awesome idea, the concept of it. This ancient alien race that probably spanned the galaxy, reigns supreme for thousands of years, and that has fallen apart due to some type of outside circumstance or infighting or something that has basically made them isolationists. Unfortunately, how it actually played out was rather drab, because what happened was, unless you deliberately went after the Fallen Empire by either colonizing next to them or building AI to tick them off, generally speaking, they weren't involved. They didn't pose a real threat to the player. And let's face it, if you played the game a few times and you got really good at your strategy, they became something that you just basically hunted, because they had the best space, they had the best planets, and they had really good tech that you could destroy. So they didn't provide the players with a lot of interaction, and they became kind of this place marker where you built your fleet to a certain size. You really liked your neighbors, so you didn't want to tick them off, so you decided to take out a Fallen Empire. At least that's the way I played. So what they've done is they've changed it so that Fallen Empires can become awakened. Now, I'm not going to spoil anything, but there are certain precursors that happen. Once those precursors are hit, a Fallen Empire can actually become awakened. And once it does, it actually can change its personality and its behavior. Awakened empires will start to build ships, they will start to colonize, and they will start to conquer all of their neighbors. They have different types of personalities, so they might be trying to conquer you or convert you to a faith. They might demand that you give a portion of your research to them, so they always will stay ahead of you in the research game, or certain situations like that. Now, you can either choose to band together with all of the smaller empires to take on this awakened Fallen Empire, or you can actually submit to them. And then once you submit to them, once the war is over, they will be nice to you and favorable to you, even though you're one of their subjects. Now, a Fallen Empire that has been awakened will not stop until it's defeated, or until another threat poses. Now let's just say that a fallen empire awakens, and you and your Federation buddies are like, we're going to get together and stop this before it happens. And everybody gives it a hurrah, hurrah! And then as you start to fight the fallen empire that's been awakened, you're losing the war, and then suddenly, bam, endgame crisis just hits. Well, the awakened empire will actually divert its attention to the endgame crisis, which I think is just an awesome mechanic, and it gives the fallen empires way more personality. Now, I'm not going to dive into every one of the points and the different situations you can get into. You can either go into Heinlein completely new and fresh and just be excited for the different mechanic as it plays out in your game, or if you want, you can jump onto the Dev Diaries. But I have to say that they are going to be changing the way that Fallen Empires are played, how they're going to play out, and the mechanics and the possible situations of those mechanics all playing out, like the idea of two fallen empires awakening at the exact same time with different philosophies, fighting each other and everybody else around them, and when an endgame crisis hits, it's enough to give me a nerdgasm, man. I cannot wait to see that happen. So Fallen Empires that are now able to be awakened is an addition that I can't wait to play around with. The last point I wanted to talk about is probably the most contentious one, and that has to do with Sector AI. Now, the Sector system was met by a little bit of a resistance initially, because a lot of people like to micromanage all of their planets. And that's the reason why there was a mod came out for increasing the planet size to whatever you wanted it to be. If you want it to be 20, 30, or all of your planets, you can micromanage them. But that being said, I actually like the Sector system. I just don't like how it's not implemented or working, I think, as correctly or as intended. So rest assured that Sector AI is being worked on. Not only is it being worked on, but it's actually giving the player more options for your ability to control sectors, including telling a sector who they can enslave or emancipate, if they could build military or civilian ships, and on far more larger scopes. So it is something they're going to be working on. I definitely am interested to see if it's going to play out as intended, because unfortunately the last change that we had in version 1.2 kind of crippled some of the different sector options and made the combination of being a slave running empire and then providing sectors a bit of a challenge, because it didn't work as intended. So it has been 3 months since the last patch. Let's hope that they've really nailed this down and that sectors end up being something that we all can agree on, or is a good system. It's implemented well instead of it being the other way around. So those are the major bullet points when it comes to patch 1.3 Heinlein, but there's even more that we haven't even touched on, including changes to space creatures and space pirates, federations and alliances, the habitability. There's a ton of changes here. I really encourage everybody to go to the Stellaris forums, go to our forums on eXplorminate, on our Steam forums, go to eXplorminate.net. Really refresh yourself, because when you start loading up your Stellaris game on October 20th, it'll be a completely different experience than it has been for the previous months. Now, I'm going to be making a video when it comes to the DLC that's going to accompany this, called the Guardians. So stay tuned to our YouTube channel if you're interested in seeing all of the different story-driven topics and all the different changes to the Fallen Empires and new portraits available when the DLC launches on October 20th as well. So this has been Army P for eXplorminate.net. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.